To start things off, I'm 17 and currently live with my dad. We have about 16 or 17 acres out where we are, with much of it my dad uses to hunt on during the season. Well, this last season, we had something interesting happen. My dad's a big-time hunter, and even goes as far as getting a doe tag for the extra meat. He's got a buddy who's a butcher, so he gets a lot of free jerky, steaks, back and leg straps, and more for him for virtually free. Anyway, my dad has a rather large shed or shop. It's older, and long before we moved here. It's like a large shed, the size of a shop that my dad installed lights in and other stuff to make it his shop for the time being. There's no concrete slab for the floor though. It's just dirt. Really fine packed down dirt. It's about a few hundred feet out if I really had to guess. During the season, he actually hangs, dresses, and harvests all the meat in his shop. Because of this, the shop usually reeks like blood and death during this time. That's pretty normal. One morning, my dad got up and he was going out to pull hunks of meat out of his big freezer in the shop. I hear him start yelling and shouting. I go running out there to see what the matter is, and to the backside of the shop, there was a massively dug hole that led directly underneath the shed or shop. When I say a massively dug hole, I mean a hole about 8 or so feet deep, probably close to 7 feet wide, all the way underneath the shop. It looked like a digging crew had came here and dug on the side of the shop underneath into it. The hole didn't look like it had been dug up by shovels, but rather big handfuls of some sort of large tool by the way the dirt looked. There was also a huge amount of dirt behind the hole on the outside, giving the impression it was like an animal dug its way underneath the shop. The only animals my dad and I know of that do this is dogs. Even if this ain't no dog, there's nothing that can dig an 8-foot hole directly underneath the shop. It was unsettling. My dad had to spend some hours filling the hole back up. Nothing inside of the shop seemed to be disturbed or moved in any way. I almost wonder if because my father just dressed a deer in there a day prior, that it could have possibly attracted a large predator. I mean, the shed isn't terribly big and smells so bad of death and blood. My dad didn't have any deer meat or parts lying around, but maybe a big cougar or something smelt it and tried to get in. I don't know. I can accept that some animal wanted it because of this, especially after my dad agreed with me, but we just can't come up with any animal that digs this big of a hole. Any ideas? I wanted to write this to you sooner, but my family and I have been busy quarantining and getting supplies ready to hunker down. Speaking of the matter, I hope you and all of your fans are staying safe as needed. On with what I saw. Back when life was a little more normal in early February, I was driving home from work. I do networking support for a rather small company, so I'm usually there all morning and sometimes into the later evening. This day in question, I got off work at around 4 p.m. The drive back to my house is roughly 45 minutes. Because of it still being in winter, it was still getting dark out earlier than it is now. I think sunset is roughly around 6 p.m., if I remember. I just know that it was dusk outside at the time, but still plenty of light and visibility. I live a ways out there, but not out in the sticks like some people do. I was on a long stretch of road that's not brimming full of houses and people, but there are houses spread out. It's a light traffic road, but not dead by any means on both sides. On both sides of the road are large fields of private land. There's nothing on them. No trees, nothing. Just large, empty fields backed up by trees and forests. I have no estimate for how many acres of field there are. Maybe 10 if I had to guess. I'm driving north on this road. No other car on the road in my range of visibility at the time. I was listening to the radio when my eye caught this large object moving in the tall grass to my right. I squint my eyes to try and see it better, and I start to make out this object, and it's actually a person. I'm getting closer and closer, and start to slow down to get a much better look. As I'm getting closer, I can see more vivid detail and understand that this was much larger than a person, even though the shape was like a person, but still walked upright like a person. It was huge. This is also when I noticed large canine-esque ears and large broad shoulders and a dog head. It was walking away from where I was looking, so I was seeing its backside through the grass. It was moving slowly, almost with a limp. It kind of slumped as it walked. It was very strange. It reminded me immediately of how zombies kind of stagger and limp slowly. Or maybe it was severely injured in some way. I don't know. I almost came to a standstill in my car, just trying to look out my window to watch it. It was far enough away that I don't think it could hear me, or my car, but I could tell that it was large. Whatever it was that had a dog-like head and walking upright, I'll never know what it was. It was walking towards the tree that were still hundreds of feet away, if not more. I eventually came to a standstill. For probably about 2 minutes, I sat there on the road, watching it, my car totally still with my foot on the brake, until it reached the trees and entered. I have never seen an animal like that before. Certainly not an animal that big. And I've never seen a bear before in my life, but I'm sure that bears don't walk upright, especially like that. It's like I was looking at the backside of a werewolf or something. I know that sounds strange, but that's the only way I know how to describe it. Some slumping injured werewolf limping off into the woods is what I thought about. Only thing is that it can't be, because werewolves don't exist. So what did I see? I was so amazed at what I saw. I was very lucky I had that time to sit and watch this thing. Had a car came up behind me, I probably would have just put my blinker on and let them pass me. No other cars came from the opposite direction either. I'm pretty sure I'm the only one that saw this thing. I tried to do some research, and after extensive encounter reading, this very well could have been a Dogman. Based on the size, this thing was huge, and the dog head, and I don't see any other options. My mind doesn't want to go there though, because we've been taught our whole lives that it isn't reality, and those things don't exist. I don't know. I haven't told any family or friends about this, so you're pretty much the first one. I just chalk this up to being some sort of unknown animal, but it could be a Dogman. I don't know. I'll never know for sure. Back years ago, when I was an adventure hound, I was hiking the various forests of the Southwest and Pacific Northwest. This sighting happened to me in Oregon, in the Mount Hood National Forest, back in 2009. I hope this isn't too alarming, because I know many friends of mine who are going to listen to this and freak because they live in Oregon and frequently explore this same national forest. Oregon is a beautiful state, full of lush timberwoods and greenery everywhere, and varying degrees of temperate and moderate temperatures. If you haven't gotten the chance to visit the state, give it a chance. It's got a little bit of everything, from desert to thick forests. Besides this sighting, I've had nothing but great experiences in this state, with much wonderful people. The sighting itself was back in May of 2009, to be exact. I was hiking alone by myself on Mount Hood National Forest. Beautiful forest full of thick pine and timber for miles on end. It's incredibly peaceful. During this time, I had hiked off-trail for quite a few miles to do my own exploring. I can remember it very clearly. I was sitting down on a fallen tree, finishing up a ham sandwich to put some fuel back in my body. As I was getting up and getting out my canteen to drink, out of the clearing in front of me, down a small incline, a large buck burst out the trees and was in full sprint mode. Before I can even finish the thought in my head, wow, that buck is huge. The largest black wolf I could have ever imagined broke through the trees right where the buck had just emerged in full chase. This was the biggest wolf I'd ever seen, and it was very, very large. In fact, so much so that it was very unnatural. It looked to be the size of a miniature horse or something of that nature. Its face, even though I was easily 200 yards away, looked strange. I can't quite explain it, but it looked different. Not the same structured face a wolf would have. Its snout and overall facial bone structure were just different. It probably took a whole 3 seconds for this thing to pass by the entire clearing in front of me in chase of the buck into the trees. More than enough time to get plenty of detail. There weren't any trees blocking the sunlight from this clearing either. It was a beautiful sunny day in May, so I got full details on what this thing looked like. By far the creepiest and strangest thing I've ever seen in the woods, period. I work closely with a childhood buddy, and he confides in me greatly, so I know he's not bullshitting me when he tells me about this kind of stuff. He lives in a much more rural area than I do, and has many more longer stretches of roads to drive, especially during the evening time, because the back roads end up being much faster than getting stuck in rush hour traffic. In November, he had seen this big, tall, hairy wolf-looking thing come out of these huge bushes at the intersection of this road one evening. Didn't get a great look at it because it was primarily engulfed in shadows, but enough that he was still able to make out size and somewhat of a shape. Scared the shit out of him. Didn't see it again until around 3 weeks later, just after Thanksgiving. Told me he saw the same creature stepping into the tree line from a slope by the road. Said there was blood and tufts of hair where this thing had just been. He assumes it had eaten a deer or some other small animal, and that was where the blood and the fur were. Then, he saw the animal a third time in January, much closer to where his house is. Said he got out of his car and felt this terrible feeling deep in his gut, like something was horribly wrong. He instinctively looked out about 60 yards to his left, and behind a large oak tree was what he describes as a real-life werewolf, standing there in the flesh. It was much brighter out at this time of the day when it happened, so he could see a lot more details. He relayed to me that this was the exact same creature he had seen the months previous, but it said it was even more ugly and evil-looking than what he had thought. Told me this thing had glowing yellow eyes. Not bright, but just a subtle glow that seemed alien-like. Said it had a shorter snout, but could see this thing had huge sharp teeth and massive claws. This thing had a smirk on its face, but it was like a "I'm about to hurt you and enjoy it" kind of smirk. He fled for his house and locked every door and window. Now, just a couple of weeks ago, he believes this thing has been trying to get into his house. Because of the street light placement, light can still shine through his closed blinds, meaning if you were to stand in front of his closed window at night, you would be able to see your silhouette in full view from inside the house perfectly. Well, a few times now, he's felt that same ominous feeling. Locked his house down and closed his windows and blinds. He said he's seen this thing walking around the outside of his house. He'll see its massive shape as it walks by and wiggles the door handle to see if they're unlocked. It will stand directly in front of the window and drag its claws down the glass. It's like it's trying to just terrorize him. He hasn't mentioned anything about it making a sound, and I haven't asked. He's not exactly sure what to do. It's become frequent lately, only showing up in the early morning and doing this to him. He feels like he's been marked ever since that first sighting, like this thing recognized the fact that he saw it, and now it's been occurring more and more. That's the only way he relays it to me. Oh, and I should let you know that all of our businesses are still open, even in the current quarantine, so that's how we've still been in physical communication. Now, personally, I don't believe he is seeing a werewolf, but I believe he is genuine in his emotion and fear. I know so very little when it comes to Dogman, so I can't say for sure that's what he's seeing either. But he puts a hard emphasis on the fact that it looks like a Hollywood werewolf, only massive. My father, very recently in the past months, had traveled back out to a spot only he knew about to hunt again during the season. During his hunting trips, he ran across his 3 old game cams that he set up years and years ago that he must have forgotten about. He stuck big old SD cards in there, and each card was full of footage and pictures. After going through his pictures, He had tons of pictures of deer, mountain lions, all sorts of animals, but the one thing that disturbed him was these 3 pictures he had on this tall, wolf-looking creature. After seeing the pictures myself, I will say it's pretty freaky looking. You can only see the top half of it in all 3, but because of the thick brush, the rest is kind of blocked out. These pictures dated back in July, a few years back, which would make sense why the foliage was so thick in the picture. It looked to be like the picture, which made sense. The animal, or whatever it was, had to have been at least 7 or 8 feet tall in comparison to where my father put the cam on the tree. It had teeth that looked to be far too big for its own mouth. Very hyena looking, actually. Like if you had crossbred the two, but very thick and matted fur, from what we could make out. Anyway, just thought you might find it interesting. There was nothing really of interest on the other 2 cams he retrieved, just on the one. I'm currently in search for the SD card with the pictures on it. My dad still has it and never deleted any of it, so I can try and get them for you. We'll be in touch. Thanks. My girlfriend and I decided one day last summer to go hiking at the closest trailhead near where she lived. At the time, this was up in northern Michigan. Both of us at the time knew nothing of the so-called Dogman and weren't into such hoaxes or stories of animals like that. Now, her and I aren't so sure and have both become much more receptive to these types of experiences that people claim to have had. My woman and I went up to the trailhead near where she lived. This would have been the Manistee River trailhead. It's like a mile loop or something. Actually, I think it's 10 miles. And we were going to try and do at least a couple miles and turn around again. This is in the afternoon. I don't know if the time of day is anywhere relevant, but it should help make the story a little more concise and clear. During this time, we were probably around a mile, maybe 2, into the entire trail. It was beautiful, since it was summertime outside. The surrounding forests and nature were just breathtaking, and it felt amazing to be out in the woods. As we started hiking further in, we both commented on how it was weird that we hadn't seen anyone else on the trail that day. We were literally the only ones. This trailhead is usually pretty well traversed in all seasons to my knowledge. It was a beautiful day out too, with near perfect weather. I don't know if we had been walking for maybe an hour or so, but I remember my girlfriend was the first to comment that the sounds of the birds and animals around us had gone completely silent. I'm talking pen-dropping quiet. It felt a little eerie, but we brushed it off and thought nothing of it as we went on our merry way. Not too long after that, maybe 15 minutes at most, is when we started to notice this feeling of dread. I didn't say anything, but my girlfriend started to say she didn't feel good, like something wasn't right. I had the same feeling in my gut. It felt like we shouldn't be there, like we were out of place, like something bad was about to happen. I slowed my pace and began looking around, searching all of my surroundings. Nothing. Nothing even looked out of place, and I didn't see anyone ready to jump out with an axe and get us. We continued on hiking, the feeling only intensifying. We kept a good view on our surroundings, and we never did see anything at this point. It's no wonder we kept on pursuing. It might sound incredibly dumb to have kept pushing forward, but we just thought our intuitions were off. Maybe another 10 minutes later, and we see this older gentleman coming towards us from the opposite direction. His pace is incredibly quick, and he looked very distressed. About 20 feet away from us, he signaled to us and asked us if we planned on continuing the trail loop. My woman and I shared confused glances as he quickly explained that there's a dogman further up on the trail stalking him, and he's leaving, and we should too. Before we could even respond, he's walking back the way we came, yelling to us nonsense, that he didn't think they were up this part of the trail and this part of the state, and we need to leave. We were just kind of confused and shocked at his reaction, thinking he was somewhat crazy. But was he? We had never heard of a dogman, had no idea at the time that this was something that to be afraid of, but we both had this ominous feeling in the pits of our stomach. That we could not deny. Something was going on. Maybe somebody was pulling a prank on us. We weren't sure. This was all weird at the time. I remember asking her, "What's a dogman?" since I wasn't a Michigan state native. What did he mean by this part of the state? We had stopped to question what we wanted to do. I decided right then and there that we were fine and we should push a little further before turning around for the day. I think we had made it a good 3 miles, might be more. It seemed at the time that my girlfriend didn't really want to push forward, but felt obligated because I wanted to. I tried my best to make her feel safe, that we would be fine with nothing bad happening. This is the part where my mind was drastically changed. We get to this part in the trail, and we start hearing this low rumbling noise. I stop in my tracks to try and listen to this sound that is now very audible with the silent forest around us. Within a second, I am fully able to process the sound and realize it's actually a low growl, coming from the trees to my right. Through the brush and off behind a tree, clear as day, was this German Shepherd-looking dog, only high up. Well, I should say at least the head was. Way past my head is staring down at me, growling and baring teeth. This head had to have been at least 8 or 9 feet off the ground. I'm 6'1", and I had to look up to look at this thing. It was this massive, massive dog head, the size of a lion's head easily, but I couldn't see the body. There was too much brush obstructing any view I had. I could see the head, and it was staring right at my girlfriend and I. We both take off sprinting back the way we came. This is where things got worse. I realized as we were running that not only were the woods still dead of any normal animals and sounds, and there were no other people on the trail, but the worst of all was that there were sounds coming on both sides of the trail, off in the brush. We began hearing crashing, breaking of branches. It sounded like multiple large animals were paralleling us on the trail, on both sides. This occurred almost the entire sprint, all the way back to the trailhead entrance, where we fled for our lives. Running back to the car was honestly such a blur looking back. I don't even know how we were able to run so much as we did. At some point down the trail, I stopped hearing all the crashing and brush breaking behind and beside. I was so pumped full of adrenaline, I don't think I fully registered that something, or multiples of something, were following us. Whatever they were had to have been huge, because they were making so much noise crashing through the trees and wilderness around us. We get back to the car, and we get the hell out of there, questioning each other and asking what happened. What was that all about? It seemed like all we had was fear and a never-ending list of questions. We asked each other about the older man that had said something about a dogman, but we didn't know anything about that at the time. Instead of being fearful, we tried to be as studious as possible, researching as much as we could and anything we could find of anything supposedly living in the wilderness of the state of Michigan. Things kept pointing back to something called a cryptid. It was in reference to a dogman, the same thing as the man on the trail had mentioned. After reading more about how they're very commonly seen up in Michigan, Wisconsin, etc., and what they look like, I truly believe we did see one of these things on that day. The description is almost to a T of what I saw. My girlfriend and I both now believe that there truly is something out there in the woods of Michigan. We're a lot more safe now when we go out, terrified of what we know is really existing, but still cautious, always checking around us and our surroundings. We haven't had to talk to anyone about this, including friends and family. For whatever reason, I guess, with all the supposed encounters, I'm surprised there isn't more talk around here about them. We honestly never knew they existed before this happened. I'm not a believer in anything that we can't see with our own eyes. I usually need substantial amounts of evidence if anyone is to make substantial claims. Rightfully so. This event that I'm going to relay to you, however, was a little unorthodox, so to speak. I've never been so creeped out by what I was told and what I saw. I kept it to myself to keep from inciting panic, but I have no idea what I believe it was. I do believe that it wasn't normal, and it was something different. Different meaning I'm not sure exactly. Let me preface with every September, my family has this big get-together at my uncle's property, which extends very far out in the middle of nowhere, basically. This is great because this big get-together is a huge end-of-the-summer barbecue. Lots of us drink, many eat tons and tons of food, and just good times to be had. Well, in this instance, everyone showed up to the barbecue early in the morning, and we had this massive cookout. Time to prep food, all that good stuff. Everything went great. Evening time, the kids are all around the property playing and having a great time. Everybody is eating food and having a good time. Some of the older boys are off in the woods in the far back side of my uncle's place. I was tasked with keeping tabs on them, making sure they weren't getting into trouble. My uncle has some old bear traps back there that are still very much active, poison, and some other semi-harmful things. But the boys are pretty smart and know the general area of where to stay and to not venture beyond. My uncle's woods are part of state game land, so you can get lost in them if you travel for miles on end. He loves it for hunting season. Gets a lot of deer, a lot of buck, gets a lot of turkeys as well in the spring. Anyway, so I'm sitting there chit-chatting with family for a little bit, halfway into my first paps, and the oldest of the boys, well, we'll call him Chuck for the story, pulls me to the side, and he's pale as white sheets. He looked nervous, petrified even. Something was bugging him. I grew immediate concern on his demeanor alone. He said he and his brothers and cousins left the woods and won't go back in. There's this really big shape that kept following them in the woods close by. His younger brother thought it might have been some really big person in a werewolf costume. I couldn't even process what he told me at first, just because it was so outlandish. I kinda laughed it off nervously. They must have been seeing things. I told him to just stay out of the woods for now, and to leave it be. He didn't say much. Now, Chuck is the oldest of the boys. I tasked him with watching out for his younger brothers when they went and played in the woods. Fast forward a little later, right before it got too dark. I had completely forgotten all about the supposed nonsense that had occurred earlier in the evening. The sun was still out but starting to get dusky, so we thought it would be great to have a big campfire, where we sit around and drink and have fun. Well, stupid me offered to go haul a bunch of wood up from the far side of his back property, up to where he wanted the fire. My uncle has about 2 to 3 cords worth of wood in this small woodshed he has on the way back side of the property, out close to where the boys were playing earlier, actually. Remember though, at this time, I had totally forgotten all about what Chuck relayed to me, and any of that really. I go grab the wheelbarrow, and I'm making my way down to the small woodshed to fill up the wheelbarrow. It's a good 600 yards away from where we were cooking out at. I make my way to the shed, set the wheelbarrow down, and start to walk into the shed to retrieve some wood. As I do this, I'm hearing brush move around and dead bramble being stepped on. You know, that kind of crunch sound when you step on dead thorns? That's what I was hearing, like someone moving around in these trees just outside the shed. This made me curious because everybody at the barbecue was up by the house. My uncle gets quite a bit of deer and other small animals coming through here, so I just thought it was that and ignored it. I'm grabbing split pieces of wood and just hucking them into the wheelbarrow. The hair on my arms and neck really starts to stand up, almost as if my body is reacting to something. I stop and listen for a second. The birds are silent. Everything around me is quiet. I can faintly hear laughter and chatter up by the house coming down this way, echoing. But the wind is all about I could really hear. This was strange. I was grabbing the last bundle of wood to throw in, and now the feeling is so strong I can't ignore it anymore, even though it's only been a couple of moments since I arrived at the shed. I was being watched. I knew it. I knew the feeling. I don't know by who or what, but I could just sense it. My mind goes into the worst possible thing. A mountain lion. I'm being stalked by a mountain lion right now, just beyond the brush. I carefully grab the wheelbarrow, and while trying to be as quiet and fast as possible, start to move back in the general direction of the house. I'm not sure if it was my reaction, or just me worried about this mountain lion was going to jump out and get me, but I turned around and took a quick scan of my surroundings. I didn't want to leave totally vulnerable with my back to the shed and the sounds I was hearing. Directly behind me, just a few ways off in the trees, was where I was hearing the rustling just moments ago. There was this large black shape. I couldn't tell what it was immediately, but I saw these pointed dog ears that were high up, at least 8 feet if I had to guess. My brain, scrambling to decipher what exactly I was looking at, understands that this definitely is not a bear. These ears were very dog-like. The mass, or shape, was so big that it didn't really appear to be something standing on all fours, or anything like that, but rather crouching, I guess. It was way too big to be a mountain lion, and mountain lions don't crouch, not like this. My brain just couldn't register what it was, but every fiber of my being was screaming at me to haul ass back to the house now. I should clarify that I couldn't really see any vivid details of this thing because of the brush and trees, but I could see that there was a large shape watching me. Like I said, I also saw the tall ears. I really don't have an explanation for it. Maybe it was some unknown animal. I guess you can take what I say with a grain of salt, but I don't know. The way my body reacted to the presence of this thing was odd. The way everything went quiet. It bugs me. It tells me something wasn't right. You always should trust your gut instinct. And my gut instinct had nothing good to say about what was watching me. I could feel it watching me. The whole thing just felt wrong. It felt off. I don't think it was any kind of animal I know, but no animal I know gives off feelings like that. The only reason anything would ever go so quiet like that is because there is an alpha predator nearby. But this thing was so big. Could it have been an alpha predator? It was easily the size of a bear, but wasn't a bear based on shape alone. That also doesn't quite explain the canine-like ears I saw. The only thing I could sum up all of this was that it wasn't normal. I don't know what it was, and I'm a firm believer in science, but this was just something I can't explain. Take it what you will.